the critical explanation or interpretation of a body of work. We examine the fandoms of young and old, looking from origin to ending and everywhere in between. They say you never truly know someone until you know what they are passionate about. Sit back and buckle up. Welcome to the Exegesis.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Exegesis. Thanks for joining me today. Interesting topic today. We are not going to talk about really anything pop culture, but we're going to talk about the culture of podcasting. And I have a really special guest with me tonight. But before we get to him, let's get some of the stuff out of the way. The housekeeping here, of course. You are here on YouTube watching live. You are more than welcome to come into the chat. And we already got some there. We already have Andrew from Science Fictionary. We got Ro from the Scuttlebutt podcast with us. I'm sure we'll have more to come. And if you're going to be listening to the audio only portion of this, which we'll have out here in a couple of days, you could always go to our bio links and find our show there. We have bio.link/exegesis, EXEGESIS. You can find the links there for the YouTube, so you can come join us in the chat. Again, we are part of the Red 5 network. You can find them at bio.link/Red5. So hopefully everybody's having an amazing week. Man, it's just, it's been one thing after another this week, but we're ready to rock and roll. And without further ado, let's bring on our special guest, and then we'll get to the news.
Hello.
Welcome,
there.
Pete. How are you,
man? Oh man, I am. I'm honored and privileged to be on your show. You and I go back, I think, before you were podcasting, and just after I started podcasting. You were one of the first people to reach out to me when I started my show way back in 2019, I guess it was. And it's so cool to finally be on the other side of the mic table from you. This is great. I'm excited.
I'm telling you, yeah, it's when I first really heard about the podcasting part of forums, that there was actually like audio and interaction. I'm like, oh, great. So I got to go find some. And you were one of the first that I had seen. And I'm like, oh, wow. All right. Well, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's polished. And we just had such a blast in your chats. And then I was like, you know what? I have ideas as well. And I went to you and said, like, how do you do what you do? And you were gracious enough to give me advice. In fact, you set up my first graphic for Star Wars through the ages.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. You gave me, whether you knew it or not, my first handle on.
Yes, I know the story. This is great.
Yeah. Which unfortunately I had to suspend Star Wars Through the Ages because Lucasfilm was gracious enough to send me a cease and desist letter. Because
did they really?
Yes. Yeah. They would not budge on letting me use the name Star Wars Through the Ages. I'm not sure why, but for whatever reason, they're like, yeah, no, I got 2 letters, and I'm like, all right, I'll change it.
When the Disney Plus show shows up called Star Wars Through the Ages, you'll know why.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Maybe they'll kick me a ticket or something to
throw me
to
an
Disneyland.
action figure, for goodness sake. Yeah.
But and there was an episode that you had, and I believe it was with Clayton Sandell. I think I said that right, Sandell.
It was, if I remember correctly, it was Dan Donahue, the voice of
That's
Shriv.
it. Yes.
Yep.
Yes, Dan Donahue. And yeah, and for whatever reason, it got onto good old Uncle Charlie Skywalker. And I'm like, that's the guy I want to be. Just that close relationship that's there, that probably has a lot of stories to tell, and most of them are made up, and he's just talking to people in his used power converter, on Mos Eisley. And yeah, that's going to be me, Charlie Skywalker, and the rest is history.
The rest is history. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. So yeah, tell everybody a little bit about yourself. I'm sure a lot of people already know who you are, but for those that don't,
Yes. So I'll try to give the short version of a long story. I am Pete Fletzer, and boy, I've been a Star Wars fan since I saw it in the theaters in 1977 when I was 7 years old. So I'll let you do the math. I've been through the dark times when there was no Star Wars. I've been through the good times and the bad times. But in the mid 90s, I used to do freelance work for Star Wars Galaxy magazine, where I covered sort of super fans and toy releases and things like that. I had the great opportunity to work very closely with Steve Sansweet for a while, and over, I think it was about 6 or 7 issues, and so that was my Star Wars return to fandom. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, 4 years ago, right? Because we're in 2023, I decided for some crazy reason to write a fan fiction novelization of the Phantom Menace. It was interesting because I was of that age, that generation that was still feeling a little burned by the prequels. It's funny how I've come around in 4 or 5 years to really love them, but I walked out of the Phantom Menace. I went to the New York premiere, and I remember walking out going, I don't know. I don't really know what I saw. I don't know how I feel about it. It took me years. So I always thought that Darth Maul was one of the greatest characters, one of the most underused villains of all time, because I also wasn't watching Clone Wars and all those other things, because I was in my own little Star Wars dark time. And so I decided to write a fan fiction novelization, and I sort of took to it as if the Phantom Menace was a film version of a really good book that didn't quite nail it. Right. So I took all the current canon, I built it on. Anyway, that's a whole other story. But what I decided to do was I then started listening to podcasts to figure out, like, how can I get this free book out to people? If I spent the time to write a 123,000 word novel, why not get it out to free to fans? And then I discovered a handful of podcasts, and I thought to myself, well, I used to love to do sort of fan coverage when I was with Star Wars Galaxy magazine in the 90s. And I could probably do that with a podcast. I mean, I have the equipment, I have a computer and a microphone. Really, that's all you need, right? And next thing you know, I started up a podcast, called on some of my old friends and connections that I had. And here I am 4 years later with Around the Galaxy continues to churn out episodes. We're not weekly like we used to be. We're when we get a good guest, but we also have our live Friday night show called Force Connect on YouTube, on our YouTube channel at the SSW Network, and that's a lot of fun with my partner Nick Milkey and Chris Ryans. We do that show live. So I've been podcasting for 4.5 years, and that blows my mind that I've been doing it for that long.
Yeah, it's so you really didn't have any intention on making it big. It was just a happy accident.
It was one of those things where, yeah, I mean, like you, and I remember even talking to you when you were starting things up. I think that, I'm also a wannabe musician. I play bass in a bar band. So I'm like a creative outlet person, but I'm not going to do it sort of half effort. I'm going to put full effort into it. And so, so I think my podcast evolved pretty quickly as far as, I went back not too long ago, and I was looking at I had Clayton Sandell on like my 9th episode or something like that. So I had like pretty decent people pretty quickly. And I didn't, this has never been um, it's always been a hobby and a great opportunity because frankly, my wife isn't not a big Star Wars fan. She's like, she could probably, if I showed her 6 pictures, she wouldn't know which one was Jar Jar Binks. Like she's that level of not fan. My son is really into it. My daughter's not into it. So I found that, my podcast and my connections through social media have been a really great way to connect with people who are as nerdy as I am. And it just so happens that I've been able to bring in some amazing guests and have great conversations and just kind of, I think the key is that I'm just having fun with it. And the moment it's no longer fun that's when I'll hang it up.
Right. Yeah. So, would you say that podcasting before the pandemic was more of an exclusive group? What do you think about the podcasting community around that time?
It's interesting because I think so at that time before pandemic. So I guess I was podcasting for a little over a year before pandemic, and it felt like every day there was another podcast popping up, and it also felt a little bit competitive, I think, which is kind of silly because none of us, it's, again, I think being in a bar band is the best thing for me because I recognize that just like a bar band, you're never satisfied with the way you sounded that night, and people people like you whether you understand why or not, or they hate you for whatever reason.
Mhm.
I think I kind of know why most people hate me, but that's a whole other conversation probably. But the I think, yeah, I mean, the plan was never to do this. Like I never had illusions that this was going to become a great source of income and I'd have 3 million. That's just not what it is. But it's been really just about connection and conversations
Mhm.
and friendships that um have happened as a result of kind of pre-pandemic. But then I think what happened um during pandemic was there were a million podcasts because everybody was stuck at
Mhm.
home, and everybody, again, like I said, you got a laptop or an iPad and a microphone. And geez, my first couple of episodes of my podcast, I didn't even have a microphone. It was just me sitting in front of my laptop, and I can barely listen to them now because I hate the sound so bad. Um but it became a little bit almost too easy to do, right? And it's interesting because, again, I try not to be competitive. I'll be honest. There used to be a time where, I always, as you probably remember, Charlie, I used to always do a 10-question segment at the end of my
Mhm.
show. And then I heard a couple other shows doing it. I was like, oh, they stole my, and I'm like, no, they didn't steal my idea. There's a million, but like you flip a coin 20 times, it's going to come up heads 10 times. It's like, it's this, was it was going to happen. And so what I've done as a result during pandemic is just kind of just rolling with it and just making sure,
Mhm.
again, the whole thing for me about podcasting is the second it has to be fun, and you have to, I mean, as you know, it's time away from your family because you'll do this episode, and then you're going to go edit it or put it into a form that you can put it up online, and then you're going to go promote it. And so you're taking time away from your family. So things that you do that take you away from your life, you have to absolutely love them. And that's why I said before, the second this becomes a drag or a job, that's when I'm going to stop. That's one of the reasons why I brought on Nick Milkey as my partner for Around the Galaxy. Takes the pressure off. Like we can both
Mhm.
work together to recruit guests. We can, if there's a week that I can't make the show, he's got it, and that makes it a big difference. I always think about my dad, who the reason I play bass in a bar band. My dad played bass in a bar band, and he always tells me that one night they had a gig, and he was packing up his stuff, and he was like, this isn't fun anymore. And it wasn't like he was
Yeah.
supporting the family with it. It's bar gig money. um he's like, I'm not doing it. And I say it all the time, like if I ever get off a show, put the headphones down and not have enjoyed it, then it's done. Then it's done. So
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, even in the chat, they were talking about how that one of them, Andrews, wasn't sure how he tricked his wife into joining him on a podcast. And I had to convince my wife that podcasting was a real thing. She's like, "You guys talk about what for how long?" And and she's like, "You sure you want to do this? Can you talk about that much stuff?" Yeah. Oh, yes, I can. But yeah, you're right. It does take away. It is time consuming, but when it's something that you love, like the topics that we talk about, it's absolutely crazy that, I mean, I'll sit down, we'll finish talking, and then I'll immediately want to start. All right, well, I'm going to go do this, and then I'll get a message, and I'll start talking over here, and someone else will message and start. Next thing you know, my wife's like, "Oh, I just went to bed because who knows when you were coming back." I'm like, "Oh, all right."
Yeah.
But
on Friday nights when we do the live show, my wife and kids are like, "All right, we're not going to see you till later, so we'll see you tomorrow morning." But
yeah, I try to make sure that my wife is like out of the house, or has other plans before I set any sort of concrete time in front of a microphone. But you mentioned about uh, the amount of people that came in once the pandemic hit. What were some of the difficulties for you to, I guess, maybe stand out from now this ever growing group of creators? What were some of your difficulties you had to face there?
It's funny because before pandemic, I remember I was talking to a fellow podcaster, and I was, because I was new, so I didn't know, is this something where like overnight it happens or whatever? And his advice before pandemic was stick it out. After the sequel trilogy ends, all these Star Wars people are just going to disappear. They're going to go back into the woodwork. This was before we knew what Disney Plus was going to be, and the fact that we were going to get so much content. And he said, you're going to have built up, 50, 60 episodes. So you'll be established, and it'll be great. And then pandemic hit, and then all the shows came out. And it's funny you ask about, what I was trying to do to stand out. And first of all, I'm not 100% sure I do stand out, but I do think, I think what we've done with Around the Galaxy is, and this is why I've sort of slowed down with the number of shows, is making sure we have interesting guests. And this is why I was excited to be on with you here tonight, is because trying to take a different angle, right? So we talked to, Oscar award-winning effects artists. We've spoken to, Dan Donahue, who's Shriv from everybody's favorite character from Battlefront 2, and a whole bunch of different people. But I wanted to, the one thing that I try to do that's different with my show, even when there's no strike, we don't really do an after show of any sort. I feel like there's a lot of those, and that's a great thing, because after shows have really become, because there's after shows that I watch, they've become like where your friends hang out and talk about the show. And some of them are huge, like, Star Wars Explained is 700 people watching them, for an hour talking about whatever show is on. And some of them are, 15 people just hanging out. But it's cool. It starts to build these little families. But what we tried to do is, we consciously try not to be remember Chris Farley in that Saturday Night Live routine where he's got Paul McCartney and he's like, "Remember when you played that thing? Oh, that was great." We try, we try not to be that show. And not that there's anything wrong with that, because there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of great after shows. And honestly, as Star Wars fans, when we watch a show or a movie or read a book, we just want to freaking nerd out about it. We want to just be like, what do you think this character means? And why was that lightsaber blue instead of green? And like, you go into that level, and that's awesome. But what we're trying to do is we spend the time with the guests and try to get to know them a little bit differently. Like, for example, our latest episode was Daniel Jose Older and his wife, Brittany Ann Williams. And Brittany, she actually wrote a story in From a Certain Point of View, Empire Strikes Back, which is where I got to know her. And if you listen to that episode, like, we talked about Star Wars for about 15 minutes, and the rest is just like, what's their process? What gets them excited? What is it about Star Wars that inspired them? We kind of describe Around the Galaxy as that moment when Star Wars fans meet,
Mhm.
as opposed to, Star Wars Friends, which are a little bit different. If you and I were to, meet at a Chili's after watching, The Mandalorian, geez, we'd have a blast just talking about it. And but also we're trying to capture that, like when you meet somebody and you're like, oh, is that a Star Wars shirt? Are you a fan? And then you like, let's explore what kind of a fan you are. Are you a fan of the shows? Are you a
Mhm.
fan of the movies? Are you a big book fan, comic guy? And just explore that piece. So that's kind of what we tried to do to make it a little bit different. The other thing is I spend probably way too much time, and I see Ro in the chat, and haven't spoken to him in quite a while. It's cool to see him. What I do that I think is similar to Ro is spend way too much time on graphics and and marketing of a podcast that is a hobby. But the hobby really is all those pieces. And like I said at the top, I'm a creative person with a little bit of an obsessive compulsive disorder. So if I'm going to do a podcast, I'm going to edit it and I'm going to make it the way I want to. If I'm going to do a thumbnail for
Mhm.
a YouTube episode, I'm gonna put the effort into it. And again, not that people don't, but like I'm that guy that like most people be like, that looks fine. And I'm like, no, do you see that F is a little bit off center. I need to move that. So
Right.
so but yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that's what separates us a little bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd say a lot of things that separate you from a lot of people there. Um, and that was another question is during the pandemic, we saw a whole lot of new voices. Some of them were good, some of them
Mhm.
were, okay, and some were just, it's like, wow, okay. Um, so, do you think that it was just everybody? What drew people to podcasting? Uh, was it like more, hey, now technology? Because around that same time, you had all these free apps come out for,
Yeah.
hey, create your own podcast. Microphones were real cheap. People could use your cell phone as that. Or was it that, hey, yeah, everyone's just stuck at home
Yeah.
with nothing to do. So I'm just going to blast this out there, no matter the quality. What do you think about that? Was it more of a technology? Was it like a perfect storm? What would you think?
Yeah, I think it really was the perfect storm. I mean, I remember talking to friends of mine, and they were like, there couldn't have been a better time to be locked down because technology had finally caught up to a place where we can work from home and we can be, depending on the job, almost as productive being at home as you can remotely. And as a result, it made all the podcasting tools that much easier. And I also think, to a degree, and I haven't thought about it out loud until just a second, but I think a lot of it is people were like, oh, I'm doing a Zoom call for work. Why don't I use the same technology and do a podcast? I can do a
Mhm.
podcast. I mean, literally, that was my feeling. I was on a show talking about my crazy fan fiction novel, and I got off the interview and I was like, I could do this. Like, how hard could this be? And so I think the tools, I think the also the awkwardness, right? I mean, before Zoom, before pandemic, two people sitting like you and I are right now was not the norm for people. Now
Mhm.
this is the way you talk to grandma and grandpa at Christmas, so it's not that different anymore. So it became easier to do. And as you said, I, it's what's the line from Jurassic Park? You spent so much time thinking about whether or not you could, you didn't think whether or not you should. And there are
Yeah.
certainly, as you were saying, and I would never name names, but there are certainly shows out there, and as you know, Charlie, there's shows out there, and you're like, how did they get such a huge following? And it's not to be a jerk, but you're like, it sounds like they literally recorded it in their basement, outside at a picnic table or something, um, and but there's so many things, and I think again it's the same thing with bands, right? I always come back to music on this stuff. There's
Mhm.
something about that, whoever they are, that people want to listen to. It's you look at a great show like the Resistance broadcast. Those three guys
Mhm.
have a chemistry that they could probably record at a picnic table at a park, and people would still love that chemistry between John Lacey James, but
Mhm.
that's what it is. But then there are other shows, honestly, that sound fantastic, and you can tell they're spending hours editing and putting the music in and all this other, and you're like, they have 4 followers on Twitter. What happened? Like, what's going on? And so there's some weird intangible that I don't think you can really. It's hard to find what that kind of magic is.
Yeah.
So
So it's funny that you brought up Resistance Broadcast. Um, I've actually got to meet Lacey and John.
mhm.
They were customers of mine working at GameStop when
Okay.
we lived in the same area, and they would come
Oh
in, and
wow.
we would just sit there. They anytime they'd come into the store, would 30 minutes of just talking, before,
Yep.
so sometimes, forget what they were came in for. And but yeah, it's that personality that even shines through um, on a camera or behind a microphone.
Mhm.
You could tell when people are passionate about something, rather than just kind of phoning it in.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things that I've always respected about you is that any show that I've watched, and I've watched a lot of your shows, is that they've always been professional. You've never seemed to have phoned anything in. Your excitement was always high, and that, I mean, as many as you've done, that's commendable.
Thank you.
Whether it's high tier guests or people like me that are,
Well,
just.
you were asking about what we try to do, and honestly, that it's funny you say that because yeah, there was we try to treat every guest, whether it's Hal Hickel, who's won an Oscar for some of our favorite movies, or I've had podcasters who are just starting out, or just people on social media that I find interesting. Try to treat them the same because honestly, Hal Hickel is just as big a nerd as ABC XYZ on Twitter, and
Mhm.
and those stories are fun, and that's kind of what we want to do. And as you know as well as I do, there have been times where you get a guest on the show and you look up at that clock in the corner and you're like, oh my god, it's only been 5 minutes. How am I going to make this work? And that, in a way, I would say that's a fun challenge. It's really not,
Mhm.
but it's but to your point, it does make it for it becomes a challenge, right? Because I do want to maintain that level of professionalism and respect for every single person that I get the chance to talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we talked about as well, and I guess this goes in conjuncture with the sheer amount of uh, podcasters that emerged during the pandemic.
Mm,
Some of those podcasters turned out to be some of our best friends.
yeah.
Um, and talk about some of the connections, not necessarily with your guests, but
Mm,
your listeners.
yeah.
Some that might stand out. How have the listeners affected you and how you do your show?
Yeah, it's interesting because it really does run the game, and it's funny because I'll start with people like yourself, Frank and Amy Mulder,
Mhm.
Framey, who
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, these are people who 4.5 years ago, when the show started, um, liked and felt compelled enough to follow on Twitter and send a message, and those were the kinds of things. People like you were the ones that made me feel like, okay, I'm getting 4 listeners a week, but we're all having fun together. And I think that that's exactly, in a way, it's part of why the pandemic um, explosion of podcasts happened, was because I got to meet I have become better friends in many cases with some of my friends on Twitter and people I podcast with than I have than friendships that I have in the real world. Like
Mhm.
Nick, who's my Nick is a great example. It's a fun story. He was listening around the same time you were, and so he was following it. And what I used to say at the end of my show is, if you or somebody you know would make a good guest, please, send me a note, message or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And Nick just was like, hey, you said if you or somebody you know would make a good guest, I think I'd make a good guest. I have a podcast, blah, blah, blah. And we just became friends over the years, literally over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And then hung out together in Anaheim for the first time, even though we worked together for almost 2 years. But those relationships, they're really true friendships. It's funny. I remember way back, I don't know, 25 years ago or whatever, when online dating first started. And a friend of mine that I worked with met a woman that he ended up marrying through online dating. And we were all like, I don't know, that seems a little strange. But I remember him telling us, he's like, no, I got to know her first. And then I got to know, I got to meet her. And it's kind of the same thing. I think what you meet with people online, I said this recently, like, I'd say 9 out of 10 people are exactly what you think they are when you get their online personality. And, for better or worse, and I know there's people that don't love my online personality, and I probably wouldn't get along with them in real life. And that's totally cool. But the people that I've met who have been genuine, and you make those connections. And like I said, like some of my best friends, I've only met once or twice in my life because I met them through the pandemic. And listeners have really become really, there's people that I will never forget. One of my favorite early memories of the podcast was a woman who goes by the name Semperfi Danny. And she's you know her. She lives up in Canada. And one day when my podcast was relatively new, she posted a picture on Twitter of her iPhone, and she was listening to my show in a Starbucks in Canada. And I was like, holy cow, like, people are actually listening to this who I don't know. I mean, it was and that's when it struck me that, like, okay, it's working, it's reaching people. And she's still a fan. She was a guest on the show at one point. And just that really unique relationship that's built when you start with Star Wars or whatever your podcast topic is. Like, I don't care if it's auto repair or Star Wars or Real Housewives. If you're listening to a podcast about it, you care about it, and that podcaster probably cares about it. And if you make that connection, and again, that's what Around the Galaxy is completely based on, that's where it starts. And then, I might find that this person has a view on something that I just can't live with. And then we would deal with that. But for the most part, if you're starting there, there's something to explore for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I've met so many really good, now close friends. The people I hang out with here, I guess, in the real world, they know nothing about Star Wars or
Right.
anything pop culture. But there's this group that I can hang out with because of podcasting and getting to meet people online, like Dominic Pace.
Yeah, good guy.
I went to a autograph signing in Albuquerque, which is 3.5 hours away from where I live, and got to meet him. Not only that, I was introduced then to a lot of people that were in the New Mexico 501st costuming group. And I'm like, that's my dream. That's what I want to do. And it took me all of pandemic to do it and to get everything, but finally got approved. And
cool.
That's a whole nother family for me now as well, and support system. And it's just, and I wouldn't have gotten that chance if it wasn't for podcasting and meeting people online and getting to know Dominic and hearing that, hey, I'm going across country to promote whatever he was, whatever he wants to promote, and small business. and to go to be able to meet him and then get into this whole new side. Uh-oh. Oh,
Oh, you're still
I
there.
think we're
I can
getting a
see you.
storm here. All right, back to normal.
Uh,
Great. All right, but yeah, I mean, it's just cool how it all is interconnecting, and amazing that things like podcasts can be. My network friends, anytime that I've had a down day, and most everybody that listens to me now knows that I have cancer and working through that, but they're always there to support and lift me up and to bring me along. When I had trouble with a particular sect of Star Wars fan that
mhm.
like to read into different relationships
Hmm.
and whatnot, a year, 2 years ago, um, and was asking questions, hey, I don't understand this, explain it to me, and then basically got thrown under the bus, and I almost hung up podcasting then.
Mhm.
But these close friends were like, you know what, hey, no, your voice matters, just keep on doing it, don't give up. And I'm so thankful for them. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's great.
absolutely amazing. But I mean, that kind of leads us into, now that things are sort of normal, as it were. What is it like for your numbers now that we've a lot of people have came and went. A lot of the people that the sturdy voices of reason, I guess you would say, that started podcasting before the pandemic have weathered through it. What are your numbers like now? Have they risen? Have they fallen? Stayed the same? What does it look
There,
like for you now that
yeah,
we've
there,
got past the?
yeah. It's a great question. The pandemic was weird because the numbers definitely dipped for sure, and I believe that's because if most people like myself listen to podcasts when they're driving to work or whatever, and if you're not driving, you have to find time to listen to a podcast. So I think the numbers went down in general. Ours are coming back up a little bit, but it's interesting. I think, as I was referencing before, this belief that all these podcasters would disappear. I don't think as many have as I expected. That being said, it is interesting. I would say over the last 3 months or so, I've seen a number of people that I know who are podcasting, posting up, "Hey, we're going to take a hiatus. We're taking some time off, or we're done,
Mhm.
and thank you, everybody." And because I think it's now that the world is back to normal. I think, first of all, I think a lot of people really loved podcasting and got into it and decided to keep doing it, because it's a great hobby. And like, unlike my band, for example, like if I have a gig on a Friday night, I'm out of the house for the whole night. Whereas this, I can go away for an hour, go to my little studio here, and then go back and be back with the family in no time. Um but I think what's now starting to happen is, I'll tell you what the biggest challenge is, honestly, is there's so many celebrity podcasts now, right? Like, it feels like every
Mm.
time you turn around, um, you have, Katie Sackhoff, who, what? Why does she have a podcast? Come on, Katie, we're fighting for numbers here, but it's, and I honestly, I love all those shows. My favorite non-Star Wars podcast is like Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend and Smartless. I love those shows. I love the celebrity podcast.
Mhm.
Um, but I think the problem is there's so many different choices. So what's happening now that the pandemic is over, which was your question, and I haven't really answered it, I've walked around it, is I think people are probably not as consistent as they were. But I also think that there's I think people found that they love it. I think, and I imagine, not listening to podcasts in other areas as much. I listen to a lot of celebrity podcasts and Star Wars podcasts, but I wonder if the auto repair podcast went away, or the whatever other podcasts. But I think because there's so much Star Wars to talk about, whether it's
Mhm.
comics or books or shows or rumors or whatever the latest controversy is, there's always something to talk about. I mean, the fact that I can do a live show every single Friday night and have something to talk about tells you, like, you don't even have to try that hard to find a topic anymore, right? So I think it's probably leveling out, and it will probably level out until whatever the next big thing is. Because podcasts, I mean, I don't know what's going to be next, but this has a couple of years left, I think.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, and yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here today doing this show because the show that I was on before, he needed a break, and he decided that he wanted to put it on hiatus. And kind of circling back to something you were talking about earlier, when I am a creative person as well. And I have so many ideas that are running around in my head. If I don't get them out and talk about them, then I'm not going to be able to think coherently, even if I do. But yeah, it's like there's this, and so I have to write it down. And then the more I write it down, and I was like, oh, I can write this, and oh, I can talk about this part, and oh, this topic over here, I can. And so I'm working on like 4 or 5 different episodes, normally at the same time, but none of them are finished, none of them are fleshed out. And it's like, all right, well, I could talk about that. And then once I feel like, all right, this is getting closer to a topic that I can really dive into and sit down and put the screws to it and put out some decent content, then I'll go for it. But yeah, it's just there's so much that's out in my head that I gotta write it down. I have to get it out of there, and it's amazing that we actually have this opportunity in this this mode of releasing some of that creativity into the world. I used to draw a lot, and my eyesight's really bad. Now I don't draw hardly anymore, just because I have to look so close to the paper to see what's going on. So this helps stem that creativity fountain. I can just let it all come out here, and I absolutely love it. So, but I don't know. And you kind of touched on it. What do you see as far as the future of podcasting? Just what, a couple more years, and and then, or do you think it'll jump the shark, and and the whole genre will continue to grow?
I don't know. I think I would say we're certainly saturated. So if it survives the saturation, then yeah, I think they'll constantly go on. I think it's there was a while there where I thought YouTube podcasts were going to YouTube shows were going to sort of supplant podcasts. But I think podcasts, people love talk shows. Talk radio has been around for as long as radio has been around, and people love to listen to other people talk about things they care about. So I think it's going to be there for a while. I'm curious what the, as you were asking before, what's the differentiators? I think the fact that it's virtually free, and in most cases completely free, to post a podcast, the barrier to entry doesn't exist. And if I walked away from my podcast for a month and a half and then came back, it's easy enough to do. It's not like it's not like a sport or something where you need to keep practicing it. So I think as people walk away, I think what will happen is people will start to be like, I don't have as much to say, and they'll walk away, and then they'll come back. So what's the future? I don't know. Like I said, I thought it was going to be more YouTube stuff, but I think YouTube is more of a platform that becomes pretty exclusive, right? So if you think about Star Wars and YouTube, who do you think of? You think of Star Wars Theory, you think of Star Wars Explained, and a handful of others. And then there's all of us who have, our small, middle size of followers. and that's great. But I think like you, we primarily use YouTube as a way to just engage versus
Mhm.
it's so funny. There's a handful of really questionable actors out there who look at my YouTube numbers and they're like, oh, he's doesn't even have 1,000 subscribers. And I'm like, it's because the YouTube channel isn't what I'm pushing. Like that's YouTube subscribers. Again, the reason I bring that up is because I think you're always going to have an elite tier, and it's you're more likely to go see a major motion picture than an art film, right?
Mhm.
I don't, if you I can go into town and catch an art film, but the new MCU movie hit, so I'm going to go watch that. And so I think podcasts though allow us to have the no name podcasts and the big podcasts in the same feed, and I can just pull up whatever I want to. So
Yeah.
I,
Let's see, there was Andrew, Science Fictionary, says that podcasting has been very therapeutic for me. I was looking for a new
mm,
creative outlet that challenged me to put myself out there more. I agree 100%. Um, there was so much stuff that was going on at the time, whether it was um, the sequel trilogy or whatnot, and I had these ideas that I really wanted, and people were touching on them. It's like, all right, well, that's kind of what I think, but I want to add this too, and so it
mm,
really was able to be a vehicle for me to express myself and to put myself out there, and yeah, it's really helped. Uh, so thankful for that. Um, there was something else, but I lost it there.
mm.
Um, but well, I guess as an example, the reason why I like YouTube and the live shows is I get to interact with
Yep.
those that want to come into the chat. And
Yeah.
I mean, I've had chats where it's just off the chain and they're just trying their hardest to make me crack or laugh uncontrollably or it just friends love to do that all the time, just embarrass you and see how red you can get on camera, which is all good times. But with an audio podcast, you don't really get that opportunity to interact. That's why I
Yeah.
try to do both. I'll do this one here, then I'll strip down the audio, edit it a little bit, and then put it out to the audio waves, Spotify and Google and Amazon
Yep.
and yeah. But there's nothing to me. There's nothing better than being able to talk with someone and then interact with the chat as well. It just adds another dynamic
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
it that I didn't think was
That's
possible.
No, it's true, and that's why we do our live Friday night show, because that's where we let our hair down a bit, what little I have left, and we just talk, and we let the chat go, and we take call-ins sometimes, and well, every Friday night we take call-ins, and now we've got some regular callers who come in, people who I met through the show, and it's just really funny, and you get the inside jokes, and yeah, the live experience is great, and a
Mhm.
podcast is a completely different animal for sure. um but it's they both are a great way to sit and talk about whatever it is you love, so that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm nearing the end of the questions, and I just now realized, you know what I didn't do? I didn't get to the news that I was going to do. So hold on with me 1 second here.
Sure.
All right. So for news this week, I decided, we're not going to talk about anything that's really ongoing as far as television, movies, things like that. Um, so we still have the strike going on. And I did want to talk about that for a second.
Sure.
For the first time, and I'm sure this has been said before, but I saw a comment, and I'm hoping that this isn't true, that uh, the, I guess the not the union, but the studios are saying that they're willing to dig in their heels and not give in until the unions are out of money and are begging to come back to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I absolutely, that is so vile.
Yeah.
I mean, these are people that have lives they have to take care of.
Yeah.
Where if you could just meet halfway and say, hey, look, all right, well, let's try to get this sorted out. But they're not even stepping up to the table. And that's
Yeah. And
ridiculous. Absolutely
from
ridiculous.
what I understand, at one point there, Bob Iger, I read this quote, was surprised that he's become vilified as a result of this, which is just kind of shows how out of touch a lot of the studio heads are. And it's interesting too, because we talk about friends we've made through the podcast. Me and Nick have become good friends with a guy named Greg Iwinski, who is a Emmy award-winning writer for Stephen Colbert, and he's one of the lead negotiators for the WGA. And we've had him on the show a couple of times talking about the strike. And it's, when you look at the numbers of what they're looking for, it's not like they're looking for 50% of profits or anything crazy like that. It's just, in a way, it's also mostly protection, to make sure that these writers don't and actors don't get screwed, whether it's through AI or having their image scanned and then used as a background character in the future without having to pay them. I mean, there's a lot of, and look, I don't pretend to know all the details of what they're negotiating, all those pieces, but to your point, man, I don't need to know the details. I just need to know that one of these sides is not negotiating in good faith and the other is really just trying to protect themselves. And that's, I mean, I have a real problem with that. So
I agree 100%. It's just the not even stepping up to the table to try to work something out is just and Andrew said, it's how out of touch his comments were, and he wasn't the only one. And I know that Rose says can't see it, so saying that publicly, but I don't think that was a direct quote. It was more inferred, and comments, side-eyed and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, if they were serious about trying to resolve it, they at least would talk to them and try to work something out. So we're not going to talk about any of that. Some of the things that we're going to talk about, though, are books that are not covered. I don't read as much as I used to. I almost prefer audio formats now. But there were 2 Star Wars books that have recently been released, and that was the Return of the Jedi from a Certain Point of View book, and Rise of the Red Blade, which is a Inquisitor book. Have you read those yet?
I haven't. I've started on From a Certain Point of View, and just to it's what I love about the From a Certain Point of View books is I always read them as kind of like fan fictiony, and God, everybody who I know is a writer who's in there would slap me for that. But some people get a little bit like upset. Oh well, I always think the R4D4 story from a Certain Point of View, A New Hope, and people are like, oh, how did this droid, did he really sacrifice himself? Yeah, you know what? It doesn't matter. It was fun. It was a fun story. I'm really happy for again, friends of the show, Adam Lance Garcia, for example, who finally got his dream of writing a Star Wars, and he wrote it about Dex from Dex's Diner. And so there's some really, and I do like those, and also like you, Charlie, I don't read as much as I used to. Short stories are perfect, man. Give me 15 minutes. I can do that. But From a Certain Point of View, Empire Strikes Back was one of my favorite reads. So I'm enjoying this one so far. And Rise of the Red Blade, I haven't read yet. But everybody I've spoken to who's read it says it gives you a really interesting perspective on why the Inquisitors became Inquisitors, and just sort of the way they were, I guess in a way sort of like Reva, like her or not, on Kenobi, she had to have had a story to get to that point. And so Rise of the Red Blade, I hear, is a really good sort of kind of in a way sort of a dark look at the way people's response to or Inquisitor's response to being a Jedi. So sounds like a good book. I just haven't gotten to it.
Yeah, same here. I have it in my Audible list. I just haven't been able to listen to it. For some reason, work keeps rearing its ugly head, and you got to get this project done. But I'm trying to listen to a book.
Don't you know I have books to listen to? Yeah.
But another one that recently came out was from James Patterson. And it's called Big Bad Wolf, and it's an Alex Cross series. Alex Cross, Along Came a Spider, Bone Collector, things that I believe Morgan Freeman played Alex Cross in the movies.
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah.
I really enjoy James Patterson's style. He really can write mystery well, almost thriller. It's not quite like a Stephen King kind of horror thriller, but more of a true crime type thriller. So I'm looking forward to getting that one as well. And of course, since you are a music head, the same as I figured, hey, there's some new music that came out within the last, I believe it's last week or 2 weeks. So we had Asking Alexandria, great band from the 90s, 2000s, released a new album. Seven Dust released a new one as well. So I'm sure Swede Studios, who's a musician friend of that I listen to, he covers a lot of Seven Dust tunes. And then Skindred. And Skindred was back in my skating days. Or inline days. That was the soundtrack of the early 2000s as well. So if you're looking for some good rock music, go check those out.
I'm excited. I didn't realize Seven Dust had something coming out. I was a big Seven Dust fan back like early 2000s, I guess it was. Love them, and they're fantastic. So, wow, that's great. I didn't know that, and I have something to go find. That's so cool.
All right. Yeah, see, mission accomplished. But so I guess last question I have for you is, what do you got coming up? Future projects? Anything that you want to promote?
Yeah, we like I said, you can follow us on you can follow my Twitter at ATGcast, where I kind of talk about all the stuff that I talk about. I have to say, it's been really strange not engaging in the discourse of the new series, because I'm doing my best to be supportive of the writers and the actors. So that's been weird, but we check us out every Friday night live on our YouTube channel. It's at the SSW Network, youtube.com/at the SSW Network, or you can go to the SSWnetwork.com. We have I don't like to say who we have till we get them in the books, but I can say we have a fairly famous screenwriter who we're talking to on Tuesday, who may or may not have a Star Wars credit. Of course, he has a Star Wars credit. We're around the galaxy. And then I have a couple of authors. One, we're talking to our friend Jason Fry, who's been on the show a couple times, and he's got his new book out about the Star Wars Atlas. So we'll be bringing him on as well. But it's we do have a couple things in the fire, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else. No, that's about it. Like I said, the Friday night show is fun. We love to have people call in. Always looking for new people to call in. We have give you the opportunity to state what's on your mind, and oftentimes we spend so much time just laughing on the show. I don't know how we actually advance it at all, but it's a lot of fun. So that's it. I mean, I think that's the best I got for you.
All right, ready for 10 questions? No, I'm just kidding.
Let's do it. I wish more people would do it, because I'd love to do this.
Yeah, I just man, one, thank you so much for coming on. I was looking for a topic that might interest you because I really wanted you to come on. Again, you've been a great influence in my podcasting career. So thank you for all that, for helping getting me started, and for just being you and being fun and engaging. We talk quite a bit on Twitter. So I'm just glad that we could finally pull this together and be on the show. So thank you again very, very much.
Well, I will say, I said it at the top and I'll say it again. It was a friendship that developed with you that kept me going and kept me realizing that what I was doing was, I don't want to say it was influencing or impacting people, but it was entertaining people. And to me, that was really important. And, you and I have we've stayed connected for all these years. And it's an honor and a privilege to sit and talk to you. And somebody mentioned it in the chat, and they're 100% right. The questions that you asked were fantastic. I hope you'll still podcast after you go and listen to this and hear me just ramble instead of answering your questions. I'm much better at asking than responding. So hopefully you won't quit the podcasting business after going, this guy can't answer a question. I gave him softballs and he can't even answer them. So
no, it's fun. It's always, and that's the crazy thing, especially with us, is we start off on one topic, and then next thing you know, we're 6 topics away from the original one, and we're just talking, and we're like, oh yeah, we were supposed to go back over here, just like the news. It's like, oh yeah, no, I just barreled right into it. So, but
that means you're having fun, man. That's what it's all about. Yep.
Absolutely. All right. Hey, for those that are in the chat, and for those that are going to be listening to the audio podcast, make sure you go find this one, this podcast, which is coming on after ours on the YouTube. WSTR Media is talking SFX, and specifically Phil Tippett and his experience in the industry and what he's done for the industry. So go check those out. Thank you again, Pete. And thanks for those that are in the chat. And until next time, you guys having a fantastic week.